Good morning. Reviewing the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1418. Essentially discussing, you can call it the process, the evolution of the dynamics of creation. Earlier we learned, especially when I reviewed Ur and Shem, the process from Atzmus built to Metzias into Metzias Nimtza, which is, of course, the biggest quantum leap of all. But then, once you have a Metzias Nimtza, basically the concept of existence as we understand it, but it's only a concept. Nothing yet has happened. So then there's a process in the Metzias Nimtza of how it evolves from pure energy into matter. When I mean matter now, I don't mean physical matter. I mean substance of definition, from non-definition to definition. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Because even in Metzias Nimtza, it still can be without definition. It can still be pshitus, which means seamlessness, just divine energy, which essentially is really what Hoyahu Shmoi Bilvad is. Hu is the etzem, Shmoi is the expression, but it's not yet with any defined way, even though we called it Oisius of the Shem, but that the Oisius have not gotten any definition or shape, because it's even, as we've learned, it's even before Kodim Aleis Rotzon. It's the third level, even higher than Kodim Aleis Rotzon, let alone Kodim Aleis Rotzon, and then Aleis Rotzon, and then comes after that the Tzimtzum and the Kav and actual creation. So Oisius is the example that the Alter Rebbe uses in Tanya, as I said. The Tanya, not necessarily he's talking about before the Tzimtzum, he's talking about it in general terms, and the Rebbe Rashab is using here to understand the process and using an example from ourselves, where the nefesh itself, we'll soon learn about Oisius and the etzem nefesh itself, but the nefesh itself is beyond definitions. It's etzem, it's an etzem. But the nefesh is endowed with koiches, faculties. And there's a process of how those faculties emerge. And the same way, there's a process of how we express ourselves. So when I'm speaking right now, when we speak to each other, it's very clear that speech is a form of an interface between one dimension and another. I'm expressing an idea or a feeling that I'm conveying to you. Same thing when you communicate. So the question is, how deep does it go? Well, it all depends on what type of speech we're talking about. If you're talking about casual, superficial words, so we can be talking about things that don't have much energy in them. Or you could be expressing very profound ideas or profound feelings. So in this process, that's what we've been going through now, these Oisius, as they begin from Hoyahu B'Shmoi Bilvad, Shmoi, that we said, Hashem Echad Shmoi Echad, which we'll get back to. He's speaking about Oisius and said there's many levels of Oisius. That was the expression. Kama, the way he put it, Hayesh Kama Mine Oisius. He started with Oisius Hadibur, words of speech, which are tangible and express. Lower than that is Oisius Hamaisa, like Oisius Haksav, written letters, which are even more concrete and more substance, or more matter, more defined. Lamaylam is higher than Dibur is Machshava, which he calls Oisius Shein Dakim Veruchnin. They are sublime or subtle and ethereal. Shein Nergoshim Elazulas. Another does not feel them, does not sense them, does not relate to them. So that's the distinction of Machshava and Dibur. In Machshava itself, he spoke about Chitzenius HaSeichel and Primius HaSeichel. Both are in Bina. Chitzenius HaSeichel, where you're more in touch with and more sense the letters of thought, even though another doesn't sense it, but you sense it. And in Primius HaMachshava, or HaSeichel, I should say, or when you go deeper into something, Eine Margish Klala Oisius. But it's still Bina. There's still Hislapshus and Tfisa. You are understanding an idea, so you have to say that idea has parameters. And parameters and definitions is essentially what Oisius are. Whether you feel those Oisius or not doesn't change the fact that they're like containers. And like I gave the example, you can read a book and not even sense that there are letters that you're reading and words that you're reading. Then comes the next higher level, Chachma. Chochmah is higher than Bina. Chochmah is only the Barak HaMavrik, it's only the spark of an idea. The words he used here is that there are Keichach b'chinas Gilei HaChochmah, Lekudas HaAskola, Lei b'chinas Tfisa b'Kli. By Bina, he said, there's a Tfisa in a container. The best proof is that we're understanding the idea. Comprehension, by definition, as I elaborated yesterday, means that you are containing it. That means there are handles, and handles are letters. They're dakim, kelim dakim, especially in contrast to letters of speech, but they're still kelim. Here, there's no. He says loy b'chinas tfisa b'kli rak shemerachef al moiche. So oir na keli is the oir fits into the keli, and they work together. Merachef ala keli ala moyach means it hovers over. So he doesn't use the word makif because it's not really a makif. Chochmah is not a makif; it's a pnimi, but it's a pnimi that's not really been. It's not graspable yet. That's why it's this very fleeting and ethereal concept that can easily. Brikas v'skidas hasechel. We said brika was like a flash of lightning, and skida was the word was scan, like an over so-called like you get the general idea. And that's why the letters there, though there have to be letters, because every expression consists of letters, because remember, letters here does not mean ABC or Aleph, Beis, Gimel. Letters means expression, osa, from the word osa. It's carrying. And for us to be able to experience something, it means it was carried to us. So Chochmah is a gilui of something. Even if it's just a yud, a spark, it's still a gilui. So he says like this, just summing up what we've learned. This is all we learned yesterday. And he says, and also the aces are built in the Korin Klal. They're not nikr. Not only they're not murgish. In Bina, you don't feel them, but they're there. In Chochmah, they're not nikr, meaning they're not yet shaped. They're not discernible, if you wish. Even on their own, they have not yet really taken on full shape. So in Bina, they've taken on shape, but you don't feel it because you're so immersed in the idea. And even when you do feel it, it's very subtle compared to, let's say, the letters of speech. In Chochmah, it's ein nikorin klal. And then he gave the example of keiches. Keiches, the way faculties also work that way. Keiches agluyim b'chelukei hamadreges zula ma'ila mizu. So when the keiches are revealed faculties, let's say the power of vision. So when it comes into the keli, that's already the eye, the power of vision within the eye. But we know there's a koyach hariyah that's higher than keli. Like we've learned earlier, etzem koyach hariyah. Etzem koyach hariyah, and there are levels in between. Same thing with all the faculties. Kamoi came b'koyches analomim. So too, they're the koyches analomim. Koyches gluyim are basically the 10 faculties which correspond to the 10 spheres, including the senses like sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. But koyches analomim are more the makav dika koyches. They call them Rotzon and tainug. Kamo koyach harotzon v'atainug sheyeshem gam kein esis. Why? The chol gilei koyach hu ayede esis. That's the rule, Kaneda, as it's known. As I referred earlier, he said similar words earlier. He said that kol gilui, I think he said the words is through esis on the previous page. Let me just see the words here. I think he said kol inyan Hashem tzirifu. Esis in lashon asa. Just wanted to find the exact expression. Okay. Something on the previous page that was very similar. Fine. So therefore, since there's Rotzon and Tainig, is some gili. When you want something, there is an expression of your will. It's not an expression of a defined faculty like I want to using your intellect or your emotion or chesed or gvura or sight or sound or hearing, but it's still a gili, and therefore they're asis, even the keiches nalamim. However, however, the letters there are higher than the level of the Eisius in Keches HaGluyim. So here again, you see levels in Eisius, just like we spoke about Dibur, Machshava, Chetzenius HaSechel, Pnimius HaSechel, Chochmah, higher than Bina. So too, you have in the Keches, you also have the different levels of expression. The Eisius are higher than Keches. Shari Keches and Alomim. Oh no, actually we stopped right here. So we're going to learn now, continue learning inside here, I believe. Well, we stopped the line later, but we'll start from here. So that's a summation of what we learned yesterday. And he's going to continue to take us on a journey upward where there becomes less and less tangible containers or less and less tangible letters, and becomes most dominant. As I explained yesterday, for us, this is a novelty because we live in a world where everything is tangible, and we have to move from the tangible to the intangible. But in truth, the creation was the opposite direction. It started with an intangible or even beyond intangible, and then it started taking on shape and form. Example again being the development of a fetus. And the same thing with anything, a seed into a tree, a concept into a full-blown idea. Anything that really is some type of birthing or growth is going to go in that direction. It starts with something far more abstract or more conceptual, and then it starts taking on shape and form, which we had learned earlier when we talked about Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, but that was already in creation, how Bria is more a concealed state, and it's more like a raw form, a raw piece of clay, and then it's shaped surah with a tzir. This, of course, we're talking even higher levels than that, than Bria, Tzir, Asir, because we're talking about going all the way from the Etzem downwards. So, but it's a similar process of going from something far more, we'll call it more the word nebulous, and then becoming more shaped and defined. Now, frankly, in science, that's exactly how they understand everything. The creation, the expanding universe, the process of everything that grows and develops from a spark, from a nakuda, and then it develops outward as it takes on shape and form. So we're going to learn now at higher and higher levels in the mashal, and then we're going to go back to the nimshal. How is it lamaila in elokus that God used this method for us to understand the process of creation, which also allows us to retrace the steps in the process of hamayich be'echad, to contemplate and in an extended way understanding the divine energy within everything. And then the levels of divine energy as we climb the ladder and we go higher and higher to more ethereal states and more ethereal states. And obviously it's meant to interface the existence with the divine and with the highest levels of the divine. So essentially it's Eiris and Kalim, but then you move to Eir, that's higher than a Kali, and even higher and higher, as we've also learned a lot earlier, and a lot about, much more elaborate about this earlier in Ayin Beis. So that's just the overview of what we're up to right now. So with that, I'll continue. We're down like third way down the page, 1418. The line that begins, I'll start there. I'll start from Eisius. The Chol Gili Kech Eisius, Kolos Eisius Elu, the letters that express the Rotzon and Tainug, the Keches Nalomim, Hein Lamaila B'Madrega Eisius Shebekeches Agluyim. They're in a higher level, meaning they're more sublime, they're less defined. Why is that the case? Because that's like we said before with Chachma. Bina is hasaga, is comprehension. That means that it is bekelim. Chachma, he said, is lamayla mekelim. Same thing, the Keches Nalomim, Rotzon and Tiny don't have a particular keli, which means in a way you could say they don't have a particular location. Where's the desire and the pleasure of a person reside? Vision resides in the eye. Hearing resides in the ear. Same thing, seichel in the brain. Emotions in the heart. Every one of the keches panimim, what he called keches geluyim, have a very defined location, and that energy enters into that location, and that's how you're able to, how that faculty functions. Rotzon and Tainug, Chassidus explains, are makifim. A makif means it doesn't have a particular location, Rotzon is in your entire being, whether it's the Rotzon, the will to walk, or the will to think, to conceive of ideas, or to understand ideas, or to have chesed, kindness, or to see or to hear. That Rotzon is in the entire being, so it's not considered an b'keli. This we learned at length in volume 1, when he compared the difference between koiches pnimim and koiches makifim, exactly this, Rotzon and Tainug compared to the koiches pnimim, which are chachma through malchus. So he explained that's exactly, they are, the koiches pnimim, koiches gluyim are erisim kelim, so that's why their oisius, as we'll see in a moment, are more defined. Where the koiches nalamim are, he said, l'maylu b'chinas yislapshus b'kelim. They can direct, think of it like the captain of the ship. A captain of a ship doesn't have a particular location. He delegates to each officer on his team, on his staff, he delegates to them different work, and each of them does have a location. They're the people working in the engine room, they're the stewards, everyone has their role. But the king, so to speak, or the captain of the ship, is more of a power kloli that drives them all, but it's not considered slapshus eres b'kelim in any specific function, but it is a koyach. You can't call it an undefined koyach. You just can say it's a koyach that is not fully manifest in a particular way. And again, the beauty of this is that we have literally in our lives, when you look at yourself and you look at your faculties, mipsari echzalakah, from my flesh I behold God. You look at your faculties, you look at your rotzon, you look at your tainug, you have literally a living example of the process of how something less defined instructs something that's more defined. So every time you do something, whether you're sitting now in this class, or you're going to go to work, or some other activity, you're actually activating something that's more higher than Kalim to direct the Eris and the Kalim, how they should function. I know we're not accustomed to using that language, but essentially that really is the driving force of everything we do. So it's a living example. This is classic Chassidus Chabad, where in Kabbalah, you're not going to hear the example of Koiches. They'll just say, Keser drives the Eses Stridus. Chassidus will say, Keser is Rotzon, and behind Rotzon, Tainug, and they drive the faculties. So you have a living example within our own beings that allows you to understand the Lakus, because essentially this is an example, this is I could say a parallel, a mirror image of how God works. That it begins with a Rotzon, and the Rotzon then defines the specifics of the Eris and Kelim. It begins with an entity that is expressing itself in Oisius, but the Oisius are still very sublime and ethereal and very abstract. And slowly that will turn into actual Oisius that will be more tangible in thought and even more so in speech and even more so in writing. So this is all an example of that we can apply and understand levels of Elokus. That's really what it comes down to. So he's continuing. So therefore, these koiches alam alamayla mibchinas islapshus bekelim valkein hakelim va'asis desham, and therefore, since they're higher than kelim, so the kelim and asis, because there has to be some kelim and some asis, because like he said, there's no gilui without kelim and asis. The sham einam b'chinas mitzias asis. So they exist, but they're not a mitzias as in a tangible, or I wouldn't even say tangible. They've not taken on shape and form. That's why I gave the example of a one cell upon conception. Does that have shape and form? Yes, but it is a cell, and it has everything in it that will ultimately emerge from it. So I'm not saying it's an exact example for Rotzon and Tainug, but it's an example to show that it exists, but you can't yet call it Mitzias as a definition. So something, there are Asias, but it's Asias that he calls that not Mitzias Asias. Like he said before, when he spoke about Chachma. That's why they're not Nikr. Okay. So now we've moved from Chachma, he's already speaking now about Rotzon, didn't yet distinguish between Rotzon and Tainug, but basically the Koiches Nalam, Rotzon and Tainug as speaking now in that category. And now he's going to break that also down into levels. So literally you see we're climbing here. Again, so far I count Maisa, Asis and Maisa, written word, speech, thought. Within that itself, there is the outer seichel, the inner seichel. We'll call that, so that's 4 levels so far. Then that's Bina, then you have Chachma, 5, and now Rotzon and Tainug, 6. And in that itself, he's going to now break it down into a bunch of newer levels. And that's how we're climbing upwards. And as I said, essentially the ratio, if you wish, between Keli and Ur. Obviously, it makes sense. The more you go downward, the more the Keli becomes prominent and the Ur becomes diminished, as we learned. And vice versa. The higher you go, the more the Ur is dominant, and the Keli is less discernible or less felt, and then less defined. Okay. Before I continue, if anybody wants to ask anything about this whole overview so far, I've spoken about ACEs, anything you want to clarify, happy to pause for a moment before we continue.
Can one talk about Osios at all, whether Nikkar or not Nikkar, in a pre-Tzimtzum place?
Well, we're going to see. He's going to talk about it.
Okay.
Where he's going. I mean, he began discussing that. He's going to discuss it, what that means there.
Okay.
The answer is generally yes, but with tremendous qualifications and disclaimers, because there it's completely conceptual. Like I've said, it's divine consciousness. But the fact that God revealed to us levels from before the Tzimtzum. So remember, every revelation, even if we talk about it right here, is some form of Osi. But you can't really say that there are Osies there. You could say there's the concept of Osi. The fact that you say Hayu Shmei Bulvad. But we'll discuss it when we get there. Meanwhile, let's go through these. The better you understand this example, frankly, the better we'll be able to understand how it is in these higher levels. Because remember, none of us have ever spent time before the Tzimtzum. We haven't even spent time after the Tzimtzum with the Kav or Ak. We live in the world of Asiya, Gashmis, and Chumris, and we're trying to understand levels that are far, far beyond us. That's why the example in our own lives, the more you can relate to the example, the more you'll be able to understand. This is a perfect example of what I keep saying about absorbing and processing. If you start, and not again, I understand the temptation, but the most important thing right now is understanding how it works with us, because the more you can visualize it, the more you can relate to it personally, the more you'll be able to understand it in the more abstract levels, as we shall see.
The word osios, you said it means asa. Asa means to give.
The Rebbe Rashab said asa on the sixth line in the paragraph in the last page. Yes, lashon asa. So he called shahu inyan hagilui.
Is that Aramaic
So it has to be also before the Tzimtzum.
One second.
Like you said.
What's that? Someone's asking a question about asa.
Wait. Let me just get the word asa is Aramaic or Hebrew?
I think you can use them in both, but it originates probably Aramaic.
It is Aramaic. It's not Hebrew. It is Aramaic.
Okay, like Asa Boiker. But it says in the pasuk Asa Boiker. So you come in the Boiker. The dawn arrived. There is I think it's used in Tanakh.
Is that like at Mashiach come?
Asa's Aleph, Sof Aleph. It means something has arrived. Asa Boiker. The morning has arrived. The dawn has arisen or arrived.
I don't know if it's a Tanakh or it's a
Asa Boiker is not a pasuk. Okay, maybe it's Chazal.
I don't know.
Okay, but these are interchangeable because sometimes they're words, Asa, yeah.
But in Hebrew, ois means like a sign, right?
Not in this context here. Not necessarily. Os can be a sign, but here os is a letter, and he's saying from the word asa. So I don't know if I would associate with that right here. Maybe other places he may discuss that. But I wouldn't bring that into this right now because it's not what he said. And the Rebbe Rashab is very precise, and it could be there's reasons he's not bringing that. Okay, what do you want to ask Reb Shleiman?
What you said before, of course it is like this. Before the Tzimtzum, it has to be ACS also. Maybe like not so tangible like now. Like here, like you said it. There is ACS
well, it's
before
not just not so tangible. Before the Tzimtzum in general, I have to say that you have to learn the Rebbe's letter. I'm sure nobody looked for the Rebbe's letter, right, that I had discussed here a while back. You have to learn a bunch of Maimonic Chassidus to really understand before the Tzimtzum properly. Because we're just using words, say before the Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum is a whole, remember, before the Tzimtzum, there's no room for existence. So here we are, people of existence, talking about a place where there's no room for existence. How do you explain that? So either we're talking just words, or you have to have some form of, a lot of, as I said, disclaimers and negating and so on. I don't want to go into right now. We're not talking about before the Tzimtzum right now. We've discussed it many times. I'll talk about it when we get there again. Let's not go there right now. I think it's better to try to understand right now how it works with our koiches and with our seichel, or with the oisius within us. Like he said, there's the oisius speech. We all can see, we're speaking right now. So you have something tangible. Machshava, more sublime. The inner thought, inner seichel, chachma, and now Rotzon and Tainuk. So I would focus on what he's saying right now here, and let's see how we understand. The better you understand this, I assure you, the better you'll understand the nimshal when you start talking about Elikus. Now, again, I'm a simple person. I go slowly. I follow the Rebbe Rashab's lead. That's what he's teaching us right now. That's the key thing to right now focus on. What I'm saying is vital, because the more you focus on understand this, I assure you, the more you'll understand when it comes later. And if we jump, we will miss some key points, and it is a process. So let's go through the process. So he says like this now. Let's continue. Now that we said there's not a mitzias of oisius on the level of the koiches nalamim, because they're really higher than islapshus bekelim, but there is something there. So he says now, let's dissect that itself. What are the oisius like, so to speak, in the level of Rotzon? So he says, so here too, there's, just like you said, there's chitzenius haseichel and primis haseichel. The outer dimension of Rotzon, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. So here again, starting to say mitzias or not mitzias. So when the person first learns this, right away it throws you. Does it exist or does it not exist? How could you say something is not? You just said it's ein b'chinas mitzias eisias, and now he says hey mitzias yeser. So you may recall I've given a few explanations why sometimes in Ayin Beis, Chassidus in general, it'll say mamish, and sometimes it doesn't say mamish. It'll say pshitus mamish. Mamish, seamless, shapeless. And sometimes it just says pshitus. In Chassidus, there's even an expression called Ein Sof Bahashola. Ein Sof means infinite, no end. But then there's an expression, Ein Sof Bahashola, Ak. In Achedesh Hazeh, Samach Vov, he used the expression Ein Sof Bahashola. Hashola is like a Shem HaMushal. It's like, so to speak, Ein Sof. Shem HaMushal means it's not actual, but it's so to speak. What does that mean? Either it's Ein Sof or not Ein Sof. Either something's infinite or not infinite. So the explanation goes, which helps us understand as well here, that you're talking again, we're not talking about a black and white world where pepper and salt and sugar are three different elements, even though they may encompass a little of each other, but it's very clearly defined. Black is not white, and red is not blue, and tall is not short, and everything has a place. And we understand things in linear terms of physical time and space. That's the way we've been programmed. As soon as you start thinking in terms that are more conceptual time and space, like I always point out, how many apples can fit on this table? 600 apples. How many ideas fit into your brain? Right away realize, 1 second, that's an interesting question. My brain is smaller than this table. There are more than 600 ideas in your brain. The answer is because an idea does not occupy space quite like an apple does. And the brain processes the neurons' ideas differently than physical space. But you can't call it no space. There is a brain, and ideas are real. 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 = 4 is an idea, as is so many other ideas. So immediately forces you to go into a world that is called, we'll call it, for lack of a better way of saying it, we'll call it conceptual time and space. It's more abstract. And that's just 2 levels that are hard to imagine. Now imagine you're going the next level. What I just described was basic conceptual time and space. So that's why it's critical when learning this. I mean, when I started learning Chassidus, I wish someone had told this to us, because it took me years to realize that Chassidus is a whole different language. It's not just it's a different paradigm. You can't use linear, like I mentioned yesterday, the instruments of the net. If you use a net with half-inch spaces, you're never going to find you're never going to catch a fish that's shorter than a half-inch long. If you use your sensory tools of sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, you're never going to experience godliness because those forces of ruchnius are not containable in such instruments. Just like a microscope can see things that the naked eye cannot see, and there are things even a microscope can't see. So you need different tools. And when you know that, it changes your perception. You realize, oh, 1 second here. I need to sharpen a whole new set of tools. And I can tell you right now that most of us in school, we're not taught that the abstract tools of suprasensory instruments. We may figure it out on our own, being creative, artistic, so you have a little imagination and dream, and when you dream and you fantasize, you could go there, but it's not like really, it's not really, we're not taught this way of thinking. But a neshama, by definition, when you say in the morning with yourself or your child, you return my soul to me. And if your child asks you, or the adult asks, where is it returning from? Where's the soul coming from? Where did it go over by night? Did it go up to the sky? Did it go to Australia? Did it go to Mars? Where did it go that it's returning to me right now? And when you say Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, that God came down on Mount Sinai, where did he come from? Where was he before? On which mountain? On a different mountain? In the sky, physical sky. Where? In the moon? Beyond the solar systems? Beyond all solar systems? So immediately, as soon as you see that, and you don't ask that question or you don't get an answer, you start becoming what's called anthropomorphic. You start turning everything into physical structures. That's why the Baal Shem Tov said that we were very careful in teaching Kabbalah, lahafshit hadvarim megashmiyusan, because Kabbalah talks in language that sounds sometimes very physical, like a yichud, a zivug. A yichud and a zivug is like the unity of a male and female. But we know that it's not in that physical. It's not physical. It's conceptual. So when you learn Kabbalah and you're not mafshit, meaning you're stripping the ideas from their gashmias, you can really misunderstand all of it and actually even distort it in really decadent ways, frankly, which have been done by people. When you talk about the Frankistan or Shapsai Tzvi and others like that. So it's critical to constantly understand that. I'm saying it, I'm elaborating because it's so vital. I have said this many, many times, but it's always good to remind ourselves. So therefore, in that sense, when we talk about these ideas, that's why I bring it back to the moshel that relates to us. So what's Chitzenius HaRotzon as opposed to Primius HaRotzon? Chitzenius HaRotzon is like what we learned about. I gave the example a number of times. You build a home for your family. So there's the Rotzon to build a home. But is that Chitzenius HaRotzon or Primius HaRotzon? That's Chitzenius. Because the home, the will and desire to build a home is a means to a Primius. What's the Primius? To have a place for your family to live. Even that, you can say, has Osa Chitzenius. Why are they living there? So we know from Torah, it says, the real Primus HaRotzon, that we could have a home to turn it into a Mishkan for God, a divine home, a sacred home, where you do Torah and mitzvahs and nachnos esarchim. So you see here a bunch of Ritzenis, they're all Rotzon. When you desire, you say, I want to build a home, you hire an art contractor, the contractor hires a team, they all have a will. This one has the will to build the plumbing, this one the electricity, this one the other parts of the building. It's all a will. But that, relatively speaking, is Chitzenius HaRotzon compared to the inner will, so to speak, of why you're doing it all. The inner will is to have a home for the host. It's like the Rebbe Rashab once had 3 maskilim, enlightened individuals who came to visit him. And they were skeptics. And they challenged the Rebbe Rashab about godliness and ruchnius and so on. They said to him, are there malachim? We're angels. We don't see any angels. So the Rebbe Rashab famously gave them an example. He said, how did you get here when you came to visit me here in Lubavitch? So they said, well, we took a wagon. We hired a wagon driver who drove us a few days from where we were to come visit you. So the Rebbe Rashab said to them, so let me ask you something. So this wagon had, of course, horses. The horses are leading the wagon. There's the wagon driver, and there's you sitting inside the wagon coming to me to ask me these questions. So you have 3 different intentions here. What are the horses thinking about? They're thinking about how can they get faster to their destination so they can get their reward. What is their reward? the hay and the food that they will be given to eat. What is the wagon driver thinking? He's thinking about the money that he's going to be paid for this job. That's why he's doing it. He's not doing a favor. That's how he has his parnasa. And with that money, he'll be able to pay for his expenses. And you three maskilim were inside the wagon thinking about whether there are malachim or there are no malachim, and you're going to ask me this question. So the Rebbe Rashab said in Yiddish, as the Vertrachten Haber und der Balagole tracht wegen sein Parnasse, sein der Malachim ke Malachim nicht? Because the horses are thinking about hay, and the wagon driver is thinking about his livelihood. Does that mean that the angels are not angels? If you think about it, and they were quite taken back by this answer, because it showed them that they are talking, you're talking like, if you want to talk like horses, yeah, you think about things that you see that are tangible, you see the hay, and that's all you think about. Just because they're thinking about hay does not mean the angels are not angels. So in other words, realities are all depending on our perspective, where we come from. So Chetzenius HaRotzon is a Rotzon. It's higher than the Keiches Gluyim, because it's still not in a real Keli, and that's why he called it not Metzias Asius, but he says Metzias Yeser, because they're dealing with a Rotzon for more tangible things, so there's Metzias Yeser. And here goes back to what I said earlier, that it's not a black and white, either it exists or it doesn't exist. Like I mentioned, let's go back to the fetus. Are all the organs and limbs and every detail of the complex individual that will be born 9 months later, are they in a Metzias within the one cell upon conception? So what's the answer? The answer is yes or no. It depends what you mean by Metzias. If you mean Metzias, a breakdown that you have the actual arms and legs and the brain and the heart and the liver and the lungs and all the details, no, they're not there yet. But to say that they are there potentially, that in some nebulous, or we'll call it indeterministic way, however you want to define it, potential way, are they there? Yes. Before conception, you couldn't even call that existence. So it's a Metzias, but also in a way not Metzias. So that's why you could say Metzias Yeser and less, but only when you understand things on these deeper levels. Because again, if you go to the tangible world, it is what it is, and that's that. But if you think of how it got there, you see a big tree, an apple tree, and then you go back to one seed where that apple tree grew from, and if you wouldn't know better, you'd say, how could that tree have grown from this seed? So you see that Metzias itself goes through an evolutionary process, if you wish. So Chetzenius HaRotzon, he says, there's more Metzias there. There's more substance than there is ukiyadua the Rotzon bechinas primis v'Chetzenius. As it's known in Rotzon, there's an outer and an inner. The primis HaRotzon Rotzon negei le'etzam nafshe. Here he's defining primis HaRotzon is what's negei to your etzam nefesh. Like in the case, like I said, what's negei in building a house? To your family. That's your etzam nefesh, or to the purpose of it all, the kavanah that Hashem created you for. B'chol etzam nafshe hu b'rotzon zeh. In this primis Rotzon, the Rotzon that he wants to serve Hashem. Or I gave a more practical level, the Rotzon that he wants to build a home for his family. That's negei. So the Rotzon, the etzam nafshe is manifest in this Rotzon. That's what's driving it. The Chetzenius Rotzon she'ein negei be'etzam nafshe. As I said in my example, the very actual building, not negei be'etzam nefesh. If it was a different type of building, it could also work. But it's necessary because of the primis HaRotzon. But it itself is not an end in itself, essentially. And therefore, b'Chetzenius HaRotzon, in the outer dimension of Rotzon, shom nirgoshim yesha asius. Now he's using the word nirgoshim. There you can sense more letters. Now what does that mean? There'll be more definition. Like when you need to tell the contractor what kind of home you want, there's going to have to be some definitions. If you try to explain it's a home for my family, there's less definitions, because that's more of a atzmizdike feeling, or to serve Hashem. Obviously, Avedus Hashem has details in it. And for your family also, you need family room, you need a living room, a bedroom, etc. But we're talking about the Rotzon. What's driving you to build a home is that your family should have a place of a secure home, a shelter, a hearth, a place where they can feel comfortable. That's less tangible than the details of what the Rotzon is involved in, which is not the gei be'etzam nafshe. In other words, the closer it is to etzam nafshe, the less tangible and less sensed will be the letters that are conveying it, that are expressing it. And again, Oisi is here from the word expression. Asa, Gili, expression. Okay, now Gili again doesn't always mean revealed to us. It just means it's outside of the etzem. It's more than just an asmis. They could think something already is being manifest in some way. Manifestation is a good word also. So he says, so Sham Negashim Yesir Eisis, Hainu Shenirgesh Halavush Hamalbish Asarotzen. So he explains, what are you feeling? You're feeling the garment that is the garment that encloses the Rotzon. Because the Rotzon is now manifest in the example I'm using, building a home. This could be also the Rotzon to take to go to shul. So the first Rotzon is you have to walk. You're walking not as an end in itself, you're walking to go to shul. The Rotzon is really to go daven. But right now, the first step is you got to tell your feet to move. So your Rotzon is that we're going to walk right now. So the levush is malbish as harotzon, that levush. So you feel that, you sense that. So that's why you have to do the walking and you have to do it properly. And that's the focus. But the inner dimension of the desire or the will, there you feel more the energy behind it, like the purpose behind it. Not the technical action that is necessary. Well, I don't know if the word action is the right word, but the technical manifestation of the Rotzon, but the Oyer, the Eina Esis Nirgoshin. And the letters, meaning the definitions of the specifics, are not sensed. That's why, for example, you find in this week's Parsha actually, that when Yaakov heard the Psura Teva that he's going to build a family and God is going to be with him and he's going to be protected, it says in Rashi that Nasa Kala Leches, he was able to walk very easily. Why? Because when you know where you're going somewhere and you're really very deep, and you have a very deep pleasure of arriving there, you're not going to feel so much the pain exertion of walking. And you can walk faster and like I said earlier when reading a book, you don't feel the letters because you're so much in the moment, in the Ur. However, if a person is not in that way, and they don't really have that passion or that excitement, then they'll very much be affected by the actual walking. They'll start feeling tired, they'll feel weak, etc. Because the focus is on the keli, not on the Ur. So the more there's the Ur, the less the Ur, the kelim are nirgash. He uses the word nirgash, not even nikr, which needs explanation, because before he said nirgash is in bina, and nikr was in chachmah. And now we're talking in Rotzon. So it's all relative, obviously, that in Rotzon you sense more the specifics, meaning the keli, like he says, the levush, hamalbish Rotzon, and the primis Rotzon, nirgash eina esis nirgashin. And this again is the same idea. I mean, I said before the example of a book, the same thing with a niggin. You hear a song, you could hear all the details and all the inflections and all the nuances, or you're so transported by the song to another time and place, it's not nirgish, you're not feeling the very musical notes and so on. Because what you're feeling is the experience. And the experience is like the oyer is the experience greater than the way that experience is happening. You may not even feel where you're sitting, are you standing or sitting? You're completely consumed in the oyer of it. Examples I've given earlier for this. So this is the next level in Rotzon. I'll stop here because the next after that he's going to go to Tainug. So you see he's literally moving all the way from Maisa to Dibur, Machshava, Bina, Chachma, Rotzon, and then Tainug. So it's a very organized structure here, going from the bottom up, retracing the steps all the way to the genesis and all the way to the root of where Oisius began in the first place. But we'll get there. So let me stop here for any questions.
What does it mean? To grasp it, you read through it. 3 lines up for where you ended. He begins with 4 lines up. He begins the ptimius haratzon hu ratzon hanogeh le'etzem nafsho, and this is the question: v'chol etzem nafsho hu b'ratzon zeh. Every essence of his soul.
All.
Okay, well, and all essence of his soul is in this Rotzon. Is that to say there's no etzem without Rotzon?
No. It means that it's so important to him. Like, let's say here, he needs to have a home for his family. You need to serve God. And it's like your whole etzem nefesh is invested in that.
Mhm.
So the Rotzon is therefore all it is basically following that etzem nefesh that wants and needs that. Whereas in the Chitzenis Rotzon, you need to have a physical home, so you need the means. Like I said, means and ends. That's the difference. What do you really want? What are you invested in? You're invested in having a home for your family. So your whole etzem nefesh is manifesting in this Rotzon.
Thank you.
Today, you don't, with the technology, you don't have to bring even this mishalim from like one cell. Today, you see it clearly that things are very powerful without being tangible.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we understand it well. It still requires a lot of work and effort. Even scientists will tell you that are involved in this all the time. You constantly need, because we are tangible beings, you always need an effort to go to a place that's less tangible. It's just the fact that the way it is. We're more comfortable with it, and we're more familiar. Like I said the other day, that we're more comfortable with the invisible, but the invisible is still not as the visible. It's a reality. Frankly, if everybody was so comfortable with the invisible, we would have no war and we would have no divisiveness because everybody would be on a neshama level. That's a neshama. A neshama is the inner force of life. But you still see people are greedy and people live in the moment and they care about what they need right now, their self-interest. That's not the invisible. That's very visible. That's the tangible reality of survival. So it's true, but we still have an animal soul. And for the record, by the way, this helps us also understand what he says in the Maimer HaMagbiel L'Sheves, how the divine soul can educate and harness the animal soul to become fuel for loving God. Because the animal soul is starting to understand here that's not all about you. There's more to life than you. There's the whole inner forces at work. And the more the animal soul understands it, the more it will become part of, from the Shema Hashem Echad, HaMayirich Be'echad, will ultimately help the animal soul reach V'ahavtas Hashem L'kecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yetzerecha. Because the animal soul does think in very tangible terms. The animal soul is like an animal that's thinking about the hay that I mentioned before. The animal does not look up to heaven, Frierdiker Rebbe said. It deals with its own survival, to breed, to protect its young, to hunt or to feed, whatever the animal needs. So the animal soul is very much living in this tangible reality. And Ruach HaBehema Yoredes Lamata, the spirit of the animal descends downward. If you remember, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer HaMagbi L'Sheves. And Ruach HaAdam El Lamayla, which is the other voice of transcendence, of reaching places that are deeper and inner, and ultimately educating the animal soul. So I wanted to say it earlier, but I'm saying it now. Very much this, to me, now that we're learning it the second time, is an explanation in the Maimer HaMagbi L'Sheves. There he briefly says it in Torah Er. The Mittler Rebbe is more at length. Basically, what is the contemplation of Shema that leads Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that leads us to V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yetzerecha. So what we're learning now is part of that process, and later we'll get back to the Hamagbi Maimer, which the Rebbe Rasham never concludes. But now that we've learned it in the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, we'll be able to piece it together, which is a big part of what we're doing now.
Since you said it, what's the connection between what we're learning now and being able to contemplate the Yichud properly?
This is the Yichud properly. Hamayach be'echad. You're coming to understand that it's not the tangible reality. Behind it are the Oisius, the divine letters, and you go higher and higher.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll stop here. Any other questions?
What does it mean? I mean, if this is,
Okay,
I don't know if you want. I don't know if you want to. I don't know if you want to indulge this question, and maybe this goes off the recording. But what does it mean for there to be an etzem without a Rotzon and Tainug? To sort of start to understand what is reality at all. What is like a person that, I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine a person.
For a person or for God?
Well, let's just say a person. I don't want to talk about God.
I'll talk about God. God obviously doesn't need anything. He doesn't need a Rotzon. He doesn't need a Tainug. An etzem is an etzem, as I've explained many times. It's just what it is. It's reality as reality. But Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we don't have a reason for Nesava because Taiva is higher than reason. He desired to have a Dira B'Tachtenim, which in turn created this whole process of Shmoi, and then and all the levels that ultimately will become Tainug and Rotzon and so on. Obviously, there are levels higher than that too. As far as a human being goes, we're not the creator, but God created us in the divine image, so we too have an Etzem HaNefesh. Etzem HaNefesh, if we're to be able to define it, would have no need for expression, would have no need for relationships, no on. But we're not that way, because just like God's Etzem ultimately chose to create and be involved and have relationships, so our Etzem also does that. The Etzem without Rotzon, Tainug, and Koiches is just a reality as a reality, and that's that. I don't know if you can equate God, us to God in the sense of completely removed from everything, because at the end of the day, we are put here. We're not Atz and Etzem like Atzmos, but we have a similarity. It's like, the best example would be if a person's completely content doing their own thing. But I don't know if a human being can function in a level without being occupied with something. Machshava meshetetes tamid is an expression. Our thoughts are always rolling. The wheel is always turning. I don't know if there's an example of a human being that doesn't have any faculty working, even when we're asleep. So
the reason what made me
the heart is beating. So I don't think we need to go there even, because Etzem HaNefesh is still there, even though there are other things functioning. Etzem HaNefesh is the very core of the essence of a person. That we talk about Yechida connected to Yom Kippur, Mesiras Nefesh. We talk about, I said before, there's the means and the end. I mean, the best simple explanation is when you go to work and you make a living, and everything you're doing, you go shopping, you buy gifts, entertainment, everything on your list of to-do list of today. Most of it is a means. It's not atzmi. It's a means to an end. What is the end? Unfortunately, most people in this world don't have an end. So they make money just to make money. And then they say, okay, I'll buy whatever I like. And what do you like? Depends on my whims. I have billions of dollars, I'll buy a private plane. Why are you buying a private plane? I don't know, it makes me feel good. I feel free, I feel special, I can go places. And why do you go places? Somewhere you're going to come to an end that there's no real ultimate purpose. However, what Yiddishkeit teaches, and this is the reality, is that we were sent on a mission here. All these things are means. As soon as it's a means, that means it's all a means to serve the role of the Etzem HaNefesh, which is to serve and connect to God. That's our mission, to fulfill what God wants of us in this world. And everything else is a means. That's the best way to explain it in, if you want, Chassidus applied terms.
It was very helpful. The reason I asked is because my mother, for example, suffers from severe dementia. Now, she's not completely gone, but suppose you have someone with the ultimate expression of Alzheimer's. They're gone. So they have no seeming. I mean, you can feed them, but they don't feel necessarily in need. I guess they can feel hunger. I don't know, but like, what's their etzem if they're completely a blob of human flesh? Like, it's trying.
But first of all, maybe their etzem is communicating with God, and you're not aware of it because you're not on that level.
Mm-hmm.
The Rebbe told Joseph Malavani, the famous chazan, he davened in the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. He was the chazan for many years. So he went by the Rebbe by dollars, and he told the Rebbe that he's going to visit his son. I think his son was in his 20s, late 20s, I believe, who has severe autism. And he's going to visit him. He's in a home there. He used the word severe. And he wanted a bracha. The Rebbe said to him, they say that autistic people can't have a relationship with other people. He said, but that's with other people. But they have a direct relationship with God. That's what the Rebbe said. Now, Malavani responded, it's true, my son has tzitzis, arba kamfis, and he really connects to them. So the Rebbe told him he should also put a pushka in his room. And last time he came to the Rebbe, he told the Rebbe he did that. So the point is, we don't know the mystery of souls communing and connecting to God. Lahavdil, I remember it was Oliver Sacks wrote a book called Awakenings, and it was made into a movie later, where they talked about in the 20s or 30s, I think, there was a group of people who had some virus, and they completely became like vegetables, literally like vegetables. They were alive, breathing, and they were being fed, but they couldn't move. And there was a what's the word they call it? Not infirmary, a special unit where these people, they all had the similar symptoms. For 20 years, I think they were in this state, maybe 15, a long time. Everyone had given up, but they were alive. So obviously, then one day, by mistake, somebody threw something in the room, and one of these people in the wheelchair put his hand up reflexively and grabbed a ball or a fruit, whatever it was. And they realized there's something, and they started throwing things, and everyone they had this reflex. So they started trying different medications on the people. I don't want to go through all the details, but it's a true story. Oliver Sacks writes about doctors, he has Awakenings, it's called. And they found a drug that when administered, ultimately revived them. And they literally came alive, but they were still living 15 years ago's memories, music from 20 years ago. It's a very interesting story. The bottom line is, obviously, it didn't last, sadly. So ultimately what happened was that it began to regress, and they needed higher levels of medication, which had all kinds of side effects, spasms, and different things that just were, and ultimately they decided it was just too much. So they all went back to that state. But one of them, before he went back, so-called, to his vegetable state, he had met a woman there who came to visit her father. And her father was completely out of it. Like you said, total Alzheimer's. And she says, I don't know if I should continue visiting my father. I read to him, but he's not there. He doesn't react anything. So this guy says to her, he's about to go back to that state, and he was in that state for 20 years. He says, continue reading. He hears you. He hears everything you're saying. And of course, he's talking from his own experience. In other words, even in that state, they heard everything and they saw everything. They just couldn't react because whatever the faculties,
impaired.
Let's call it like a stroke victim will sometimes tell you, I want to move my hand. God forbid, I can't move my hand. My will is there, my hand is there, but there's some disconnect between we'll call it the etzem and the koyches hanefesh, like a nerve. Like think of a nerve that got severed.
Yeah.
So it doesn't.
Anyway,
I
think these mushali may have been some of the best of the class to help us make these distinctions. So thank you.
Yes, I don't want to call it etzem hanefesh in the way he's saying it here, but it definitely understand that there's a world beyond giluyim, beyond the expression.
Yes.
A world beyond Isis, let's put it that way.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi. That was very powerful. Yasher koach.
Yeah.
Talking about Alzheimer, if I may, there's somebody close to me that I had to deal with Dr. Rotzon, I was doctor at a stage of, putting a tube, yes, no. And he says, look, I'm going to tell you as a doctor, and then I'm going to tell you as a chosid what the Rebbe told me. The Rebbe told me, we don't know why the neshama is still staying in a body, that medically they claim that there is life, but there is no quality of life. They're not gaining anything. They're not giving anything. Based on medicine, we would do certain things, but Rebbe told me that's not my business. Why the Eibishter decided the neshama has to stay in this body, if you understand or not.
Exactly. That's where we get down to talk about children before birth or older people, where you don't want to tamper with the mysteries of a soul and what's going on, and that's what it comes down to. Not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. I've seen, unfortunately, relatives as well that it's very, very difficult to see, especially in stages where they're still frustrated and they're losing their memory, and it's like it's horrible. I had a guy, sadly, if I may say, an opposite story, that basically lost his whole faith and his whole connection to God, because he says, if he wants to take my father, take my father. Why do you have to put him through this indignity and basically complete, humiliation of Alzheimer's? It's much easier for him to just die than live like that. So it's a mystery, we don't understand. And maybe it's to teach us something, like the Rebbe said, The soul lives on. What is that story with the guy that used to come visit his wife who had Alzheimer's? And then slowly she forgot everybody, including him. That was the last thing to go. And the nurse says, why do you come visit your wife every day? She doesn't recognize you. And his response was, yes, but I recognize her. You know? So love of another person, real love, is deeper than reciprocity at times. You don't always get what you want, but the connection is there, and it's like you love your child. It makes no difference what the true love, and it's healthy. A healthy love is not conditional. We hope God loves us that way, and we love God that way. You know, that's why we can go through some times where God does things that we really doesn't make any sense and can be very painful. But there's an atzmisdike connection.
Very beautiful. Very beautiful, Rabbi.
What?
I just thinking maybe it's just a fantasy, but I wish every medical college has this class, maybe very short, but what you just said about everything, what you just said, has to be taught to every medical personnel, because whatever happening right now, even in England, did you hear that they accept that the patient can be, how do we call, actually killed because at the last stage of cancer? And it's progress everywhere. It's progress in the minds of the medical professional. If only they knew all what you just said, their work would be much more effective.
I totally agree. You know, there was a time where medicine was primarily administered by spiritual people. It was due to the Enlightenment. I wrote a whole article on this, that the Enlightenment, they turned medicine into science and separated from the soul. Now, if you think about it, healing and soul are very much connected. And today there's a little movement going back, but it's still very much compartmentalized. Where, you know, that's why soul doctors, you know, who were the healers in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu? You went to the Kohen Asher B'Yamecha. You went to the Kohen. The spiritual leaders were soul doctors. And I don't mean soul doctors, you know, quack doctors, and we're talking about the real understanding of the soul and its healing, a healthy body and a healthy soul. This was known even by the Greeks and others. It is split. It became very much the time where science and religion decided to say, you know, science decided that religion was too primitive and so on. But there's that connection of spirituality and physical healing. That doesn't take away from the advancements of science and medicine and understanding many things. But there's no question, I totally agree with you. I've spoken many times to doctors I know, and you can't really be a real healer if you don't understand soul as much as body. It's not just auto mechanic. You know, the body is not just an automobile that you're fixing up its pipes and its cylinders.
Yes.
Today they know that. I mean, things like gratitude, like hope and optimism. I mean, good doctors will tell you right away that a patient that has visitors and guests and has hope, far more likely that they're going to fight, and the immune system gets stronger when you have that type of positive energy, you know, like tragut idea. And when you don't have it, it weakens you demorally. Human beings need hope and they need support. There's something that the mind has a big effect. What do they call today? Mind, body, what do they call mind, body, soul healing? I forgot what it's called. Mind, body. There's a whole 3 things. I forgot what it was. He did a whole thing on PBS a number of years ago. There's a whole
there's
series
the mind-body connection, but I'm not sure if that's what you're thinking about.
But there's a 3. There's mind, body, soul, I think. Maybe those 3. I don't remember now.
You know, the remedy of what we really need right now, because the medicine deteriorates so much that they start to kill people and not to heal. They became opposite what they were created for. And for that, We don't need a big meditation about all of this can come later, but just to be aware should be installed right now to any college, to every college.
Yep. Yeah. I'll just share this before I conclude. It's still, the recording is on, but it's worthwhile. It's an important topic. I think I've shared the story here with my own story. I was as a teenager, I had severe what they call ragweed allergy in the summer. All of August and mid-September, they call hay fever. So the ragweed season, the pollen drove you crazy. I don't know if any of you have ever had that. So basically, it's not necessarily life-threatening, but it's miserable. Your nose is stuffed, your throat is tickling, your eyes are running, your whole plumbing system basically is stuck. The nicer the summer day and the more breezy it is, the more miserable it was. So one summer I was in Detroit in camp, and I had a severe attack, almost asthmatic. I couldn't breathe. So in the infirmary, they gave me something to clear up my breathing passages, my air passage. Okay, I got back to New York. I went to a Dr. Redner. He was a very famous allergist. And, so he did the tests, the scratch tests here, they inject you with different things. And two of them blew up really big. One was dust pollen, and the second was ragweed. And I had an attack right there in his office, pretty severe. And again, couldn't breathe. So he gave me an injection, and everything cleared up. I can't tell you, I felt like I was in paradise. Because for the first time that summer, I was able to breathe, and not just breathe, it was beautiful. Like, the most beautiful type of day. And I said, what did you inject me with? He said, adrenaline. Listen to this, adrenaline. So I said, is that the adrenaline that builds up naturally when we're excited about something, anticipating, adrenaline? He said, yeah. So I said, so why you give me all these tests? Why don't you just give me adrenaline? And I'll take adrenaline every time I have some. So he said, you'll build up immunity. You have to have stronger doses, and it could be dangerous. Adrenaline is not meant to be used regularly. So I asked him a question. I said, you know something? Doctor, can you explain to me? Sundays, for some reason on Sunday, I don't feel I have allergies. Now that's impossible that every Sunday there's no pollen. So why is that? And Sunday was the day when it was the hardest day for my work, because that was the day after Shabbos when we had to recreate the Farbrengen that we remembered. And it was very intense. So I always thought I don't notice the allergies. Like here, you don't notice the oisius. I'm so immersed in my work, I don't notice my nose running, my eyes itching, the tickle in my throat, and all that. And so I said to him, is it possible that the adrenaline that I build up on Sundays because the pressure of work is so intense somewhat affects me like the adrenaline you just injected me with? He said, absolutely. He told me, did you ever see an opera singer or a ballet dancer or a Broadway actor or a pianist, a concert pianist? You ever see them sneeze or yawn on stage for 3 hours? Why not? Sneezing and yawning is a natural reflexive reaction of the body. He says because their adrenaline is high, and when the adrenaline is high, you have a certain type of superhuman control over your body. It allows you to stop certain things that would naturally, like a sneeze, will not come to you. You have that. It says, you ever see you could set your mind that you want to wake up 6 a.m. and you really set your mind strongly to it. You don't need an alarm clock. 6 a.m. you'll be awake. So I learned from that simply adrenaline, if you have a passion in life and you're driven by it, it has not just a psychosomatic effect, it has a real effect on your being. And I can tell you for myself, there's no question at times when I'm really working hard and I'm really immersed, even if I have a common cold or something else, it doesn't affect me quite. And it's not a miracle. I think the body generates chemicals that are much stronger than we think when you have purpose. I mean, I want to speak about the Rebbe, but I saw the Rebbe, a man all the way in his 90s, Farbrengen. Did the Rebbe ever have a cold? Now, of course he did. Sometimes he had a cough. Sometimes he was hoarse. I remember other things. He had sciatica. But still, there was a certain superhuman strength. So you could attribute it to miracles. That he's a godly man and he's like Moshe Rabbeinu. But I think there's also something to be said, even on this level, when you are driven like that, your koiches come out in a whole different way. Now, it's not automatic. It's not a magic pill. Obviously, all of us are humans and we're fragile and things could happen. But I think that's an element that when people are lacking that, I think they're much more prone to illness and so on. Like someone told me, I used to say to them, why do you have a cold every 3 weeks? He said, I have nothing to do with my life. I have money. I'm lazy. And so I'm much more prone to colds because I'm just, it's a good excuse for me not to go to work. I don't have to do anything. I hang around. So almost like looking forward to it. Anyway, that's part of in my little speech on this matter. Okay. What do you think about that? Pretty amazing, right?
Very. Having Rotzon can be healthy.
Oh, if you have a previous Rotzon, yes.
Yeah. It's a driving force.
Yeah, because it's like a mission. It's like when you're on a mission and you have to do it and there's urgency, it's a whole different reality. It's like if it's optional, we all know what happens to optional things.
Right. This is, the whole conversation started, we asked a question about, that stemmed from my mother with dementia, but these topics that we learned today push you to think, what does it mean to be alive?
Yeah, good. That's right.
So for me,
exactly. And like the Rebbe's father says, l'chaim v'loy l'mavis means, l'oy l'mavis means absence of death. But l'chaim is a whole different, real life is not just absence of death.
Yes. Exactly.
Real life is a meaningful life.
If you want to understand,
I may use that expression.
Like you said, we don't know what kind of Rotzon and timing is going on inside someone with severe autism or Alzheimer's. But still, putting that caveat aside, if you start with someone who's severely impaired like that, you can begin to appreciate more these osios, pardon the pun, for understanding how thoughts and desire manifest themselves in action. And to me, it was helpful.
By all means, I have to sign up in a moment because I must run, but I'll just say this. When I see a mother, and I've seen it, look into the eyes of her child that's severely impaired, mentally, autism and others, and doctors say, what do you think? And you see years later that there's some connection. I'm not saying the person is healed, that they got rid of their issues, but there's a soul connection. There's no question in my mind. I see it all the time. You have to have that belief and you have to have that connection. You connect on different levels. You don't always connect on nefesh, ruach, neshama. Sometimes it's an achai chaya level or yechida level or deeper. And to me, that's like an essence of so many things in life. Because I talked about extremes. What about many people we give up on or people, we dismiss and so on? There's a soul in there somewhere. Like Ronald Reagan, the ultra optimist, said about the farm boy that, he goes into a barn and it's filled with manure all the way to the top. So what does the optimistic farm boy say? There must be a pony in here somewhere, where other people would say other expressions, right?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Let me end here. We're middle of page, 1418?